Sorry for the very warm welcome. Can you see my screen?
I think we see the presenter view and not the audience view.
All right, let's see if I can change that up.
Yes.
All right, sorry, I'm going to have to reset this because otherwise I see something different than what I need to see here. All right. No.
Yes. Oh, now we can see the. Should we? We can share the slides too, just in case it's not working at your computer.
Let me see if I can just switch this one more time and get the correct viewing. Do you see the presentation or my notes?
We see the presentation.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, wonderful. So thank you, Michaela, also for your wonderful presentation and your insights. Thank you to Lingo Systems for inviting me to this event and for giving me this opportunity to share my perspectives and my company's experiences with MT technology. A very warm welcome to all the attendees. I realize we're all coming from different places in the world. So depending on your time zone, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I'm based near Toronto, Canada, so it's still morning here. Before I get started, I wanted to say I think it's really important for LSPs to have a forum where we can share in an honest and non-competitive manner our experiences. It helps us to understand where we're positioned relative to each other in the localization marketplace, and can even act as a compass, if you will, for all of us to ensure we're heading in the right direction. As mentioned, my name is Shazia Justin. I'm the co-founder and CEO of PSG Translations. I've been in the localization industry for about 15 years now, and my company is a multilingual service provider located both in Italy and in Canada. We cover 120 language pairs worldwide in 50 sectors, and we're both an ISO 17100 and now 9001 certified company. We are also currently in the process of getting our ISO 18587. And for those of you who don't know this certification, it's the one that certifies the post-editing of machine translation output. And it's very useful certificate to have when promoting MT solutions to existing or potential clients. It's also the certificate that's most commonly requested by our clients who want MT solutions for their translation projects. So it's definitely worth looking into. I describe my company as a small to medium enterprise, which I think is a very important distinction to make insofar as the size of your company may determine whether you decide to implement one MT solution over another. As a small to medium enterprise, you may consider if you're using MT for one or two major clients or for multiple smaller ones or both, and you'll need to consider what your annual budget is and whether you can afford to allocate funds to a more complex solution. In contrast, a much larger multinational company may have more resources at their disposal and can therefore dedicate larger budgets, hire MT specialists, and invest more heavily in creating a rigorous MT infrastructure. So to put it simply, the size of your company does matter in terms of the time you can dedicate and the budget you can allocate to the various solutions available in the marketplace. Which leads me to today's topic of chasing machine translation technology. Now, why this title? Because honestly, we have been chasing the technology. It's been a bit of a struggle for us to make sense of the MT landscape. There's no one out-of-the-box solution that we could find that fit every client or every budget. Some solutions are more expensive than others. Some have multilingual applications, and others require the purchase of language-specific engines dedicated to only one language pair and sector, where you then must feed the engine learns, and there are the F measures, blue scores, and others that you use to gauge the output. We spent about 3 to 4 years to make sense of the information out there, not only because there really are so many MT options, but because the technology is ever evolving. So trying to find the best fit for the needs of our clients has been challenging. Consider that clients themselves, their needs vary, and more importantly, they're bound by their budgets. So while they might like one solution over another, fundamentally, they look at the bottom line in terms of cost. We also found that it's not just a question of the client side, but also trying to get compliance from our translators and post editors, where for the most part, we've noticed many don't want to work with at least generic MT generated outputs because they feel the technology isn't evolved enough. And so they'd have to do the translation from scratch anyway, or because they tend to see it as a challenge to their livelihoods, that it somehow cuts into their earnings. So they're not as willing to work at discounted rates. But I'll touch on these aspects a bit more as we move forward. Let's begin with an overview of the main topics I'd like to cover. I'll start off with a look at the MT landscape and then discuss the different types of content that we examined, looking at what would be the most suitable content to use with the MT solution we chose. We'll then move on to how we integrated this MT solution into our workflow with a step-by-step chart to show you our MT process in more detail. I'll then discuss how we post-edit our machine translated texts. And lastly, provide you with some tips on how to improve MT by looking more closely at the source text and provide you with a few concrete examples. So what does the MT landscape look like? From our understanding, there are four types of MT solutions, which I'll touch on briefly to give you a better understanding of the variety of choices in the marketplace. Two of the most common engines are statistical and rule-based engines, and they differ in the way that they process and analyze content. Statistical machine translation translates texts by analyzing existing human translations, utilizing a large bilingual text corpus, and then applies prediction algorithms to determine the best way to translate texts in any given situation. Whereas rule-based machine translation translates texts using the basics of linguistic rules to break down the content and relies substantially on dictionaries for its output generation. The third type of engine is a mix of the statistical and rule-based called hybrid machine translation. The hybrid approach is characterized by the use of multiple machine translations within a single machine translation system. The hybrid approach has been successful in improving the accuracy of translations, and there are several popular machine translation systems which employ the hybrid methods. The most utilized approach, of course, is the neural machine translation, which is a type of machine translation that relies upon neural network models based on the human brain to build statistical models. The essential advantage of the neural machine translation is that the engine can be trained using a process which is similar to the way the human brain works through trial and error, a process called deep learning. This approach improves the translation in most cases, offering an output that looks more fluid, more human. In general, most of the top engines use neural machine translation technology like Google Translate, Microsoft, Systrans, Cantan, DeepL, and so on. These are only a few, which you see here on the screen, of the engines that we tested. Of course, there are plenty others that deserve a look. I should add at this point, I'm not being sponsored by any of these MT solutions in providing my opinion, nor am I promoting any one solution over another. I truly think it's an individual choice that each LSP should make depending on their specific needs, budget, and time constraints. For us, we found a neural machine translation solution with an optional post-editing phase to be the most cost-effective and suitable for most types of content, and that's the solution we opted for. So let's touch briefly on the various types of content we tested. Keeping in mind, our objective was to try to understand where MT could be successfully applied, or the most suitable type of content for machine translations. When evaluating the best MT engine to use, you must consider the source text, language pairs, industry sector, and content type. As the table demonstrates here, depending on the content and desired quality output, MT can be useful or not. For quick translation to understand the content in the draft or internal communication, we found MT to be sufficient without having to do any post-editing, unless requested by a client. However, looking at technical, legal, and financial content, we found that while MT is suitable, the output almost always requires a rigorous post-editing phase to ensure the content is accurate. While it's true that the accuracy and speed of MT has greatly improved in recent years, thanks to the software and hardware innovations, machine translations still retain a very robotic element and do not correctly reproduce the nuances of tone, sarcasm, humor, creativity, and other aspects of human communication. We found in cases such as marketing and editorial documents that an MT solution was difficult to apply, given the creative or highly specialized nature of the content. And then in many cases, our translators argued it would be better to do a pure translation from scratch rather than post-edited machine translation. Of course, this point can be debatable depending on the MT solution you apply. There are customizable engines that, when taught, the content can produce better outputs, even for these types of content. But again, we didn't invest in these more costly solutions, so we didn't test them to their maximum capabilities. Let's now take a look at our basic MT workflow. And I think this chart is particularly interesting because it'll give you an idea of how you might be able to integrate a solution into your daily process. We evaluate the client's source file. That's the first step we take in terms of the type of content, the intended use, the target audience, the languages, source and target, and ask, of course, the all-important questions about their expectations, especially for quality. If the expectation is that they want a low quality, then we can provide that rather quickly. If the expectation is that they want a high quality, then we need to invest more energy. We then gather and/or create terminology and glossary lists. We discuss and define the scope, the effort, the process, looking at cost savings, timeline, deliverables, and critical milestones. In some cases, clients just want a general understanding of what's written in their document, so quick MT is sufficient. Other times, the client needs a full, detailed post-editing. And moreover, in some cases, we realize that we can't even apply an MT solution, and a standard human translation would be better option to satisfy the client's needs, goals, budget, and timeline. If and when we've decided to proceed with an MT solution, our project manager sets up the production framework, including the client's MT, the terminology, the client's glossary, style guides, and we do a spell check or grammar check on the source file before running it through the MT. We then run the document through our CAD tool. In our case, it's either Trados or MemoQ, and it will pre-translate utilizing the client's TM, all the 100% matches. Fuzzy will be left untranslated, and any no match will then be translated using the machine translation plugin. In our case, much like Michaela, we settled on DeepL. We selected DeepL because it supports several European languages, which is what our company needs. And for other languages, we rely on our various LSP partners who have made other MT choices, which cater to producing the optimal outputs for those languages. Once the output has been generated, we then send the translation to a human post-editor who revises and corrects the MT errors. And once the file has been post-edited according to our indications, we then run a final LQA and update our TM glossary list and deliver the final translation in the target language to the client. We don't stop here, though. There is one other phase that we add, and it's a very important part of our process, and this happens after delivery. And this is to ensure we adhere to the level of the quality expected by our clients, and that is to get our clients' feedback. I'm sure most of us can attest to the fact that getting client feedback isn't always easy, and when we do get it, it's not always easy to understand. So in our process, we think it's nonetheless important to proceed and make the attempt, So we have our clients in-country contacts where possible, review the translation and provide their comments. We then update our terminology and glossary lists and style guides. Lastly, we update our TM to reflect the changes and to ensure we can improve on our quality for future translation projects for the client. Let's now take a closer look at the post-editing process for machine translated documents. There are industry-specific terms defined even at the level of the European Commission, which identify different degrees of post-editing to be either light or full. Light post-editing entails minimal intervention by the post-editor, only what's strictly required to help the end user make some sense of the text. The expectation is that the client will use it for inbound purposes only, often when the text is needed urgently. Alternatively, there's the full post-editing, which involves a greater level of intervention to achieve a higher degree of quality. The post-editor must correct grammar mistakes, typos, rephrasing sentences that are hard to understand, and or deleting information that might have been added or deleted by the MT process. The expectation is that the outcome will be a text that's not only understandable, but presented in some stylistically appropriate way, so it can be used for both inbound and outbound purposes. We tried to formulate a series of guidelines for our post editors to assist them in achieving and maintaining this high quality standard output. The primary responsibility, of course, of the post editor is to ensure that the MT output is comprehensible, that it corresponds to the source language content, and that it complies with any requirements and specifications we will have set out for them. During the full post-editing process, the post-editor is instructed to read the MT output and evaluate whether it's necessary to reformulate the target language content, use the source language content as a reference to understand, and if necessary, correct the target language content. Ensure that all source language content has been translated and no extra content has been added. Produce target language content either by reviewing and revising the existing machine translation output or by providing a new translation as needed. So our checklist, and I think this is also an important page, looks something like this. Before delivering the full post-edited output, we ask that the post-editor review their work according to the following points. The translation is both accurate and complete. So no information has been added or omitted. The content adheres to the client and or domain terminology. The translation is comprehensible. So the sentence have been restructured as necessary for clarity. The translation style is adequate. The content is appropriate for the audience. The style is appropriate for the text type. Stylistic guidelines provided, if any, are observed. Grammar and syntax are correct. Spelling and punctuation and hyphenation rules are consistently applied. This brings me to my final topic, which I think is also a very important aspect in achieving higher quality output. As Michaela mentioned, I'll be discussing how the source text itself was written, and we found that specific guidelines for how to write source texts, which are intended to be processed by an engine, to be written in a very controlled manner. I'll briefly touch upon the top 7 points that we found to be very useful, though there may be even more. The general guideline for controlled writing for an MT engine is that the simpler the writing, the easier it is for the machine translation engine to read and translate it. So what are the rules? We want to avoid any sort of spelling mistakes. A machine translation engine cannot accurately translate a misspelled word. It's important to ensure that spelling is correct before sending the text to the translation engine, which is why in one of our initial phases, we tried to run a spell check on the source text just to make sure that on the client side, there are no errors. Secondly, to use short and concise sentences, so avoid conjunctions, for example, and, but, that, and limit yourself to simple sentences in general. Make sure that each sentence is grammatically complete so that there are capital letters, at least one main sentence, and final punctuation. Use a simple grammatical structure to not overcomplicate the structure of the sentences. Avoid any sort of passive sentences. Using active sentences is a straightforward writing style that eliminates vagueness and ambiguity. It's very difficult for machine translation engines to successfully translate passive, vague, or double entendre sentences. Remove any unnecessary words. So removing words that do not contribute to the meaning of the sentence. Also avoiding idiomatic and colloquial phrases, another point that Michaela had touched upon. Machine translation engines may not convey the correct meaning of idiomatic or colloquial phrases, and the meaning may not make sense in the target language itself. Lastly, write sentences using words that can be found in a general dictionary, as they can be processed far easily with a machine translation. Let's now look at two examples, so concrete examples with different types of content where we ran a machine translation. In the first example here, we have a technical text from one of our automotive clients. The source language was English and the target language was Italian. The client had a very tight deadline and requested machine translation with full post-editing. There was no available TM. We utilized our domain terminology and created a client glossary. We used Trados as our CAD tool and generated the MT output using DeepL, which can be seen here in the Trados interface. As you can see, the source text itself was written in a very controlled manner. The writing is very straightforward. There's no idiomatic or colloquial phrases and required less effort to modify the MT output. The post editor was instructed to perform a full post editing, correcting grammar mistakes and typos, rephrasing sentences that were hard to understand, adding or deleted information, adding or deleting information that might have been added or deleted during the MT process, and rendering the text not only understandable, but stylistically appropriate, that the translation could be used for both inbound or outbound purposes. As we can see here, there were very few modifications that were required on the part of the post editor. Obviously, the quality of the output isn't what we would see in a human translation, but definitely meets the requirements of what the full post editing defines for quality expectations. Moreover, it successfully met with the quality expectations of our client. In this case, the client could read the target language and understand it, so they were happy with the end result. And fundamentally, the quality of the output must reflect what the needs of the client are. In the second example here, you can see that the source text is from one of our other clients and is more marketing and promotional in nature. It was written with more creative words and colloquial phrases. And as such, there was a greater degree of effort required from our post editors. Arguably, even an MT solution didn't prove to be as useful, and potentially a direct human translation would have been better and even faster. In some parts, even a transcreation, where a higher level of creativity is required, could have been used to render the translation more comprehensible, fluid, and effective. So again, it's important to analyze the type of content, the intended use, the budget requirements of the client, and understanding the expectations of the level of quality required by the client before applying an MT solution. This brings me to the conclusion of my presentation. Thank you very much. I hope it was informative and offered you some insight into the world of machine translations. I'll now open the floor to any questions.
Thank you very much.